The classroom air was thick with silence and challenge as the professor leaned back against his desk, his sharp eyes locked on the young, black student who stood tall despite the snickers around her. His words carried a sting, a test wrapped in arrogance. "Fix this engine," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I give you 10 minutes. If you can even begin to make sense of it, the whole class will know your worth. If not, well, maybe." "Some things are better left to those born for it," the students gasped, half from the audacity, half from the thrill of watching a duel that felt larger than the lesson itself. She did not flinch. She stepped closer to the twisted machine that looked more like a puzzle from another world than anything human hands had built. The metal gleamed under the fluorescent lights, a mess of tangled wires, snapped belts, and cracked gears pieces lay scattered across the table as though someone had sabotaged it just to prove no one could breathe life back into its shell. The professor smirked, arms crossed, convinced she would tremble or turn away, but her eyes narrowed like a storm forming in silence round her. The whispers began. Some students whispered that it was impossible, that no one had ever managed to fix that engine, not even the brightest minds who had tried in years past. Others murmured that the professor was unfairly targeting her because she had embarrassed him once before by correcting his mistake during a lecture. The atmosphere felt like a trial, and every gaze cut into her like a blade of doubt. Her hands reached out steady and fearless, though her heart pounded like thunder. She traced the broken wires, her fingertips catching grease and metal dust. Her breath slowed as she entered. A focus, the kind that silences fear and amplifies instinct. She remembered nights back home when money was scarce and broken appliances were her playground. She would sit with tools her father barely afforded, fixing radios, fans, and motors because survival demanded it. She knew how to listen to machines, how to hear their language of clicks and hums, how to find the heartbeat inside chaos. The professor glanced at his watch with a smug smile. 9 minutes left, he announced, loud enough to stir the tension. The students chuckled nervously. Some shook their heads, certain she would fail. She ignored them. She picked up a stripped wire and twisted it into place with a skill that spoke not of luck, but of years. It's hidden behind her quiet demeanor. She slid a gear back where it belonged, tightened a bolt by hand, and wiped sweat from her brow. The machine looked monstrous, but she treated it like a friend waiting to be heard. Her lips moved silently, as though she were praying or whispering secrets to the engine. The professor's confidence began to falter ever so slightly as he saw how her hands moved with certainty, not hesitation. He tapped his desk impatiently. 8 minutes left, he barked, but his voice lacked the same sharpness now. Girl pulled out a small tool from her own backpack, something worn and familiar, the kind of tool passed down through necessity rather than privilege. She tightened the coupling, adjusted a valve, and stripped another wire with precision. A low hum vibrated faintly from the engine, and the class froze. The hum was quiet, like the first heartbeat of something long dead, stirring again. The students leaned forward, mouths parting, eyes widening. They could not believe it's 7 minutes left, the professor said. But the words trembled in his throat. He pushed his glasses higher, as if that could steady his disbelief. She wiped her hands against her jeans, smearing grease like war paint. She found a crack in the ignition housing, patched it with a makeshift seal from a rubber piece she cut with her blade. Her determination burned through the room, stronger than the fluorescent lights. No one dared to whisper now. They only stared. In all 6 minutes left, the professor muttered, but even he could not tear his eyes away from the machine. The girl pulled the final wire across its socket, her fingers trembling not from fear, but from adrenaline. The engine's hum grew louder, vibrating against the table, until the metal legs rattled. The classroom filled with a sound no one thought possible. The impossible engine was breathing again. 5 minutes left, he said, but his voice was barely audible. The students erupted, gasping, covering their mouths. One boy whispering, "She did it. She actually did it." Another girl clutched her friend's arm, eyes wide with disbelief. Black student stood tall, her chest rising with heavy breaths, sweat trailing down her temple. She pressed one last switch. The engine roared alive like a beast awakening from slumber to sound, thundered across the classroom, vibrating against the walls, shaking the very floor. Students screamed, not in fear, but in shock. Some cheered, some jumped from their seats, hands pressed against their heads. In disbelief, the professor's jaw dropped. His smugness shattered into pieces. He took a step forward, as though he needed to touch the machine to believe it was real. His eyes darted from the roaring engine to the girl who had just done the impossible. The clock still ticked, but it no longer mattered. She had beaten the dare, not with excuses, not with hesitation, but with raw brilliance, earned in silence, away from privilege, away from praise. Her hands, now stained with oil, told a story of resilience and skill no classroom could ever teach thee. Professor's lips quivered as he tried to speak, but no words came. The entire classroom had witnessed it. They had seen arrogance collapse before their eyes. They had seen impossible bow down to determination. The girl finally stepped back, wiping her greasy hands on a rag, her eyes calm, steady, almost fearless. She did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply looked at the professor and said quietly but firmly, engine fixed. The silence that followed was heavier than any roar. The student started, torn between awe and fear of what this meant. The professor swallowed hard, his pride broken, his challenge destroyed. His eyes held a flicker, not just of shock, but of something darker, a quiet rage masked by disbelief. What now? Whispered one of the students, and though no one spoke it aloud, everyone felt the question burn in the room. What would the professor do next? The girl had not just fixed a machine. She had broken the balance of power in that classroom, and the fallout was only beginning. Engine still trembled with a living hum, while the professor forced himself to smile, the kind of smile that hides a bruise and calls it wisdom. Class dismissed, he said in a voice that tried to sound calm, yet carried a jagged edge. Everyone out now. Except you. Chairs scraped the floor. Students spilled into the hall, buzzing with shock and adrenaline. Some glancing back with wide eyes, as if leaving a crime scene, while the culprit stood fearless in the middle of it. Phones were out already, whispers already traveling faster than the hum. She stayed by the table, hands steady, breath even, gaze fixed on the man who had tried to make a lesson of her and found himself the lesson instead of you. Brought your own tools, he said, not a question, almost an accusation that violates lab policy. Unauthorized equipment compromises safety and integrity. His words paced like a metronome. For blame, report to my office after lunch and bring that wrenchy. Tucked the tool into her backpack and said nothing. She knew the tone, not the voice of a teacher caught in awe, the voice of a man building a case in the hallway. A tide of faces broke around her. Some offered nervous smiles, as if her victory were contagious, and they feared being seen near it. A few reached for her with quiet praise. You were amazing. You did it. I knew you could. Others avoided her eyes. A boy in a varsity jacket let out a short laugh that sounded like a warning. The professor will fix this, watch him by the time the lunch hour bell rang. The engine was silent again, the door locked, and the rumor mill already turning. She walked across the quad, through wind that smelled like rain, cut through the noise of leaf blowers and traffic. She did not hurry. Her father had once told her that rushing turns truth into panic. Walk like you were already where you belonged. Officer Professor Hale was neat in the way of rooms staged for an audience. Awards on the wall, a glossy photo with donors, a framed invitation to a symposium with a title about future power systems and equitable access. The word equitable felt like an empty cup on a cracked table. He gestured at a chair, but did not sit himself. You have a gift, he said. There was a pause that held a hook and a chain, and gifts can be misused. I'm placing you on a temporary lab suspension. There was the chain until a committee reviews the incident. You brought unauthorized tools. You created a hazardous situation. You powered a unit that was declared unsafe. I will not tolerate recklessness in my lab. He folded his arms like he had closed the door and leaned against it from the other side. She sat very still and looked at the floor for a long breath. Then she raised her eyes. You dared me to fix what you called impossible, she said. I did. In 10 minutes, I did. If safety mattered, you would have said, power down and we will start again tomorrow. You did not. You wanted me to fail. His jaw twitched. You misunderstand. I wanted you to learn humility does not equal silence, and safety does not equal controls. Something inside his gaze flickered. He stepped closer and lowered his voice. A board of industry partners is coming next week. They will evaluate the engine project for a grant. If the narrative becomes that you fixed the system my team could not repair, it could cast doubt on years of work. It could undermine my leadership and, by extension, the funding that keeps this program alive. You have options. If you agree to collaborate under my supervision, I can ensure you are rewarded a scholarship, perhaps a research assistant role. Discretion is the currency of progress. She stared at him and saw what he was not saying. Be the genius behind the curtain. Take credit without the light. Accept a place that looks like opportunity but feels like a leash. Her silence answered before her words arrived. No, he blinked the word like a slap. Then this will be formal, he said. Expect a notice from the dean. I will request that the footage from the lab cameras be reviewed, and we will see exactly how you performed your little miracle. She left without asking permission and did not take the hallway past the lab. She took the long way through the basement corridor where the air smelled like dust and old plans. Near the maintenance door, she stopped because she heard someone call her name. A figure in a gray coverall waved from the shadow of a vending machine. It was the building tech they all called Uncle Ray, even though no one knew his last name. You cool kid, he said with a warm smile. Saw the crowd at the lab. Sounded like a rock concert. That you're doing? She nodded and his smile grew. I heard the engine sing, he said. We do not get much music in this basement. You got good ears. Your father would be proud. She stiffened. How do you know my father? Uncle Ray tapped his temple. I remember faces and the way hands move. Your hands move like hands that learned to fix things before. They knew how to ask for help. That is a family language. He reached into his pocket and slid her a folded paper. Found this under a bench when I was changing a filter last week. Looks like someone hid it where no one would look. I figured it belonged to whoever could hear machines talk. She unfolded the paper. It was a sketch of the engine core in pencil with notes scribbled in the margins. Some corrections circled in dark strokes. A timing mark shaped like a faint star drawn next to a gear tooth. Her breath caught because that mark was not a symbol from any manual. It was a secret sign her father taught her when she was 13. Mark the tooth like a star. When timing is off by a whisper, the star means trust your ear over to gauge her eyes. Stung, but she did not cry. Uncle Ray watched her like he was guarding a bridge no one else could see. I never saw who hit it, he said. But I heard things people forget basements carry. Whispers. The professor has been under pressure. A big contract is on the line. Someone said a phrase I did not like. Clean optics, which is fancy talk for hide what does not fit the story. Thank you, she said. She folded the paper and slipped it into her pocket like a small beating heart. If you hear more, let me know. She stepped back into daylight with a new kind of fire running through her. In her room, she pulled out an old plastic box from under the bed. Inside were notebooks from high school, a tiny gold screw that had once fallen from a broken blender, a photo of her father with a grease stain on the corner that no soap could lift. She flipped through the notebook with a quick thumb and found a page where the same star mark grinned back at her. Her father had drawn it the day he taught her to. Time by listening, and not just by measurement. There was a note under it in his careful hand. Hear the truth, even when instruments like her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Check the storage room behind the machine shop tonight. After lights bring, no one trusts the star. She stared at the screen until her own reflection looked like a stranger. It could be a trap. It could be salvation. Either way, it was not a door she could pretend not to see. Campus at night held a different sound. Distant laughter from a dorm, the hush of trees along the brick path, the thud of her heart counting time in her ribs. She slipped through the side of the engineering building and moved past the poster about safety and innovation taped crooked on the wall. The storage room door was metal and scuffed and held shut with a padlock that looked stern but tired. She knelt and ran a finger along the hinge until it found a loose screw. A minute with her small wrench and a gentle slide later, door swung enough for her to slip inside. Dust motes spun in the thin glow from her phone. Shelves stacked with bands full of bolts and clamps and abandoned dreams. She moved to the back, where a cage held long crates stamped with inventory codes on. The lowest shelf she saw letters inked in a rushed hand star. Set her chest tightened. She crouched and pulled the crate forward. Inside lay a collection of modified parts, each with a small star scratched near the edge. Her hands shook as she lifted one polished gear and turned it in the light. The star was exactly where her father would have placed it, a quiet sign for anyone who can hear machines behind her. A click snapped the night like a twig under a boot. Light spilled through the doorway. Professor Hale stepped in with 2 campus security officers at his shoulders. He looked like a man who had prepared a speech and a verdict. "There, it's his," he said, caught in an unauthorized area after hours with restricted parts from an ongoing project. "We will need your bag, miss. We will need your phone." She stood slowly and held the gear like a piece of proof that did not speak and yet told everything. "Why are these parts marked with a star?" she asked. "Why is that mark on the engine in your lab? Who taught you that trick?" The professor did not flinch. "That mark is meaningless," he said. "Probably vandalism from some student who thought they were clever. Security, please escort her to the office." One of the officers hesitated. He was young and tired, and looked like he knew how to be fair when no one was watching. He glanced at the gear, then at the crate, then back at her. "What is the star?" She swallowed and answered. "It is a timing index used by a mechanic who never worked here. My father, he used that mark when he rebuilt engines at the factory before the layoffs. He taught me that mark when I was a kid, and he taught me to hear when sound and motion fall out of step. If those parts carry that mark, then someone brought his work into this lab without his name. Someone built a story and left out the story. Tell a silence. Pressed the room." The young officer looked at the professor, who looked at the older officer, who looked at the floor. Power shifted like a weight across a shelf. "You are not sure we'll hold." The professor lifted his chin. "Baseless, sentimental. This student broke into a storage room and tampered with evidence. You are done here," he said with a sharp bite. "A disciplinary hearing will be scheduled. You will not step into my lab again." She reached into her pocket and unfolded the sketch Uncle Ray had given her. She held it up under the light. Her father's star winked from the margin, and under it, a faint signature, almost erased, but still legible, if you knew what to seek. She felt the truth gather its strength like a storm at the shore. Before anyone moved, a voice came from the hallway. "What is going on here, Ray?" Woman stepped through the doorway, wearing a blazer with the crest of the school. Dean Rivera. Her eyes moved over the room in one sweep and landed on the gear in the girl's hand and the crate on the floor and the stubborn set at the professor's shoulders. "Reports of a break-in," she said. "Instead, I find a contested story in a room full of silence." Girl lifted the sketch higher. "Dean, this mark belongs to my father. It is on parts in this cage, and it is on the engine I fixed this morning. I believe this program is using work taken from him without credit. I believe someone has been hiding that fact under the word impossible." The professor cut in with a tight laugh. "Conspiracy theater do not indulge." Dean Rivera did not smile. She looked at the young officer. "Please collect the items, but do not remove them from this room. I want photographs, and I want the camera archive from the lab pulled by morning. No one touches the engine until I say Sota." Professor stepped forward in protest, and the dean raised a hand. You will receive the same respect you have extended to your student, she said, with a calm edge which at present is under review. The girl felt her knees waver. Something had cracked open, and the dark behind it smelt like rain and truth and risk. The dean turned to her and spoke more softly. You will need proof beyond marks. In memory, can you get it? The girl looked down at the gear with the star and thought of a kitchen table where a tired mechanic once drew diagrams on napkins to keep a promise to a child. Then she looked up at the dean, at the officers, at the professor, whose eyes held a shadow that looked like fear. Yes, she said, I can't. The dean nodded once. Then be ready. Morning will come faster than we want. The officers began to photograph the crate. The professor stood like a statue, fighting the wind. The girl slid the folded sketch back into her pocket and stepped toward the door. The night felt sharper, the path longer, the stakes suddenly alive. She reached the threshold. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from the same unknown number. The words were brief and cold as steel. He is not the only one who stole from your father. Check the archives under the old name, and you will see who signed the original patent. Her stomach tightened as the world flipped one more time. There was a name she had not said aloud in years, a name that belonged to someone who had once promised to help her family and vanished when the factory closed. Name she thought was dust. She stepped into the hall with the sound of cameras clicking behind her and the echo of her heartbeat leading her forward. If the message was true, then the engine in the lab was not just a test or a dare. It was a doorway into a history built on the bones of a land. The person waiting on the other side of that doorway was someone she never expected to face again. Morning arrived with the glassy light over the brick paths and a thin chill that held the scent of rain and paper and old truths. She barely slept, and when she did, the unknown message threaded through her dreams like a wire pulled too tight. Check the archives under the old name. Find who signed the original patent. She reached the administration building as the doors unlocked and found Dean Rivera already awake at a desk, scattered with folders and a mug that had gone cold. You said you could get proof, the dean said without greeting. We will start now. The archives room is 2 floors down behind records and compliance. They walked in silence through halls that echoed with footsteps from decades that never learned to rest. A librarian named Maya met them at a keypad door and peered over tortoiselle's frames with a curiosity that felt like a lantern. We keep records by project lineage, she said as she typed. If the name changed, we track the earliest label under alternate titles. What is the old name? She swallowed before answering, because the word tasted like dust and a kitchen table, and a father's voice. Post drive. Mark for Maya nodded once and vanished between aisles of metal shelves. The dean folded her arms and leaned against a filing cabinet with the posture of someone who has weathered storms and is not afraid of the next one. When Maya returned, she carried a gray box and a binder sealed with an old sticker that said Factory Collaboration Archive. On the box, a tag to read Pulse Drive Family. They laid the contents on a long table under a buzzing light. Blueprints with grease smudges along the edges, a notebook with the numbers written in 2 hands, a scanned packet of legal forms stamped received by a date long before she entered this school. At the top of the packet sat a provisional patent application, and her breath jumped when she saw the inventor's line. Marcus Bell and Victor Lang. Her father's name shook on the page like it had been waiting to be read out loud and never was. Victor Lang sat like a stone beside it. She knew that name now, not from the factory or the neighborhood, but from glossy brochures and donation plaques. Victor Lang, philanthropist, alumnus, angel investor, chair of the advisory board for engineering advancement. The dean leaned forward. Turn the page, she said. The next sheet was an assignment form transferring rights to a holding company with a blank space where a fair price should be. Signature in her father's hand appeared above a line that said inventor, though the ink looked weak and wandering. 2 lines down, Victor Lang's signature sat bold and centered. Witness signatures followed, and there, in a careful academic script, was another name. Hal. Her pulse thudded in her ears. Hal had signed as a witness years before he became the professor who now threatened to erase her. The page smelled faintly of solvent and time. Maya pointed to a note in the margin of a blueprint. Someone wrote a star here, she said softly. A timing reference, maybe the star, her father's quiet mark, stamped on both metal and memory. The dean spoke in a voice that kept its steady line. If this assignment was coerced, it may be voidable, but we need context, and we need to know whether the school benefited knowingly. I will not allow this place to be a cover for theft. Before they could answer, the keypad clicked again, and footsteps entered fast and careful. A man in a lab coat paused at the threshold. It was Nate, the graduate assistant, who rarely looked up from his laptop in class. His eyes held the stress of someone straddling the collapsing bridges. Dean Rivera. He said, I need to file a report. The lab camera drives were wiped just after midnight. Someone used my badge in the server room, but I was not there. I think my profile was cloned. The dean's jaw tightened. Who had server access? Nate hesitated. Professor Hale does, so due to senior techs and the department admin. But Hale asked me yesterday if I had checked the storage room inventory after hours. He was fishing, and now the girl watched him and saw the tremor he hid behind the controlled breaths. Why are you here, Nate? He took a step closer, lowered his voice, and slid a small flash drive across the table with fingers that shook. Because I saw something earlier, and I copied it before it vanished. Lab notes in a folder called Optics Draft Statements about author order and messaging, a press release template that calls the engine Hale Core and lists Lang Dynamics as a strategic partner. Your name is nowhere. Either is your father's. I was told to clean the record for impact and clarity. I cannot. Daddy looked at the patent packet and the star and the blueprint, and something like guilt washed over him. I did not know, he whispered. Not like this. Maya glanced toward the door. We should keep the box here. Nothing leaves without a log. The dean nodded. Photograph everything, Nate. Then go home and lock your door. If anyone asks, you met with me about curriculum. Nothing more. Nate swallowed and left with the promise to return in an hour. The dean turned to her. We have a map now, she said. Lang Company, a witness and likely partner, an engine renamed to erase its first life, but we still do not know why your father signed. She closed her eyes and saw a factory floor lit by flickering bulbs. Her father walking home with tired shoulders and hope. He could not quite keep from spilling a man in a clean car, promising a bridge out of layoffs and dust. Promise me we will not drown in this factory, the man might have said. Sign and I will bring your work to the world. Then the factory closed, and the clean car never returned. A phone buzzed on the table, not hers. The dean checked her screen and frowned. Security just flagged a disturbance near your dorm, the dean said. Someone broke in and left quickly. No sign of theft yet. You should not go. Alone I will be fine, she answered, but her voice cracked enough to show the tremor inside. Maya handed her a small camera from a drawer and a slip of paper with a number. Call me if anything happens. Archivists are quiet, but we do not forget. She ran across campus with the wind pushing at her back and a flock of pigeons lifting off in a rush that felt like warning. Her dorm door hung open by an inch, and the lock looked scratched but not broken. Inside the bed was shifted, and the desk drawer half out like a tongue that could not form a word. Notebooks remained, but a small plastic box was missing from under the bed. The box with the gold screw and old photos and napkin drawings. She stared at the empty space until her throat burned. Then she saw something new, taped under the edge of the desk, a small envelope with a star drawn in the corner in black ink. She peeled it free with shaking hands and slid out a key with a number stamped in the head. A bus station locker coat her chest. Surged with a wild hope and a sharp fear. Someone was playing chess in the dark and moving pieces with her father's mark. She threw on a jacket and left the room without touching anything else outside. The sky thickened into the color of steel, and the first drops of rain tapped her face like impatient fingers. The station smelled of coffee and diesel and long goodbyes. She found the locker bay and ran her thumb over the numbers until the stamped code found its twin. The lock turned with a tired clack, and the door swung wide to reveal a padded envelope and a small spiral notebook bound with twine. She took them to a bench and opened the notebook first. Inside were entries in her father's hand, short lines about shifts, repairs, promises, and a name circled again and again. Victor. Under one entry, a question. What is a fair trade when the other hand holds your job? The envelope held a memory card and a folded letter. The letter bore the same star in the corner and a date. Month before the factory closed. If I cannot keep this safe, the letter read in her father's voice, you must find someone who can. If Victor brings the papers and the company logo and calls it a partnership, do not sign without a lawyer. If he insists, tell him I will go public with the test video. He will say, the test does not matter. It does. Her breath hitched. There was a test video, proof that the engine worked before Lang signed anything and before her father's name faded. A witness. No one could bully or erase. She slipped the card into her phone with fingers that almost dropped it. The screen lit up with a single file. A clip began with a shaky view of a factory bay. Her father stood beside a prototype engine mounted on a frame. A cluster of men watched, including a younger Hale wearing a visitor badge and Victor Lang in a dark coat with a smile that never reached his eyes. Her father adjusted a valve and tapped a gear tooth with a wrench where a tiny star glinted. Listen, he said. Over the noise here it settled into time. Then the engine came alive with a clean, steady hum that lifted goosebumps across her arms. Lang clapped slowly and put a hand on her father's shoulder. We will change the world, he said, and then he stepped toward the camera as if to shield it from seeing anything else. The clip cut off, but its weight filled the station like thunder about to arrive. She backed up the file to the cloud and hid the card under the insole of her shoe. The next message from the unknown number arrived while she laced her boot. Do not go back to the dorm. They are waiting. Her heart pounded hard enough to bruise. She looked toward the doors and saw a black SUV slide to the curb like a shadow finding its wall. Two men stepped out wearing campus visitor badges under jackets that were too plain. She stood and moved with the flow of travelers toward the opposite exit head. Down, hands calm, stride steady. Her father had taught her how to leave a room without announcing it. With fear outside, she dialed Maya's number with shaking fingers. I have the proof, she said. Video from the factory. Hale and Lang both on camera. Key. The engine live and clear. Maya's breath caught. To come to the archives, she said. In hurry, she cut across a side street and nearly ran into the young security officer from last night. He looked startled and then relieved. I was looking for you, he said. Someone filed a complaint this morning saying you erased the lab footage and broke into storage with a stolen key. They put your name on a disciplinary alert. I do not buy it. Do you have anything I can carry to the dean now? She hesitated and then handed him the notebook with her father's entries and the scanned shots of the patent she had snapped at the archive. Keep these flat and hand them only to the dean or Maya, she said. There is more, but I need to move. He nodded and stepped into the stream of students with the documents pressed under his jacket. She turned down the alley between the bookstore and the maintenance shed and heard a soft roll of tires behind her. The SUV had circled the block and idled at the corner like a patient animal. She slipped through a side gate into the old machine yard where piles of equipment rusted under a mesh of vines. Rain began in earnest, and the world narrowed to the smell of wet iron and the rhythm of water drumming on sheet metal. Her phone buzzed again. A new message from the unknown sender. You are doing well, but you have not looked at the old name for Victor. Checked the patent index for Lang in the year before the factory closed. He used another surname once. Find it, and you will understand who funded the witness signatures. She stopped in the rain and stared at the words until they blurred. Another surname, a different past, a money trail with a disguise. She thought of plaques and photos in gala speeches and tried to map a second identity onto the smiling face that offered scholarships and sponsorships. A car door shut somewhere behind her, and footsteps splashed toward the yard. She ran through the gaps between machines and climbed a short fence that left a streak of rust on her palms. On the other side was a narrow stairwell that led to a basement door propped open by a wedge. A wash of warm air, smelling of solder and coffee, drifted up. She slipped inside and found herself in a small workshop. Lit by a single lamp on the workbench sat a radio, half disassembled, and a paper cup with the words Uncle Ray written in black marker. "You pick funny times to visit," came a voice from the back. Uncle Ray stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag, and raised his brows at the sight of her soaked jacket and fierce eyes. "I figured you would find the locker," he said. "Your father hid the key years ago. He asked me to hold the space, but not the secret you know. I guessed more than I knew." He looked at her phone in the video, still showing her father by the humming machine. "That sound is clean," he whispered. "Cleaner than anything that came out of the lab upstairs." Heavy footsteps pounded past the open stairwell. Ray moved to the door and slid the wedge free. He turned the deadbolt and nodded to a second door that opened into a dark corridor that smelled like paint and dust. "This runs under the old theater," he said. "Take it, and you will come out by the main quad. But before you go, there is something else you should see." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a laminated badge. Faded with age, it bore the logo of a foundation she recognized from donor boards. The name printed across the top made her stomach dip. V. Aaron. Her eyes flicked to Ravictor. "Aaron Lang," he said quietly, to last names, depending on which room he wanted to enter. "Find that name in the patent index, and you will see which foundation paid the notary and the witness. And you will see that the witness list was not just Hale. Someone high in the college signed as well." The lights flickered as if the building felt the tremor running through her. Ray looked at her with apology heavy in his eyes. "I am not sure yet," he said. "But I would start with the board directory from that year. Look for anyone who left without a farewell." Footsteps above slowed, then drifted away. The rain softened to a hush. She slipped the badge name into her memory like a key and gripped the phone with the video tight enough to leave marks on her palm. Then she stepped into the corridor with her heart burning like a small beacon against the dark. She climbed out by the main quad and almost collided with Maya, who was running with an umbrella and a stack of folders tucked under her arm. "We pulled the board minutes from the year of the factory deal," Maya said, breathless. "One trustee resigned mid-year without notice, a finance chair named Aaron Vale. The middle name on his private filings is Lang, and his foundation underwrote the engine lab the same month. The patent assignment, clear day, gust of wind, tore the umbrella from Maya's hand and sent it tumbling across the grass. The girl did not chase it. She looked at the library tower where the archives waited. She looked at the admin building where polished portraits smiled. She looked at the road where the black SUV crept by like a tide that never recedes. She felt the storm inside the campus that no one had named until now. Maya took her hand. "The dean is waiting," she said. "Bring the video, bring the names." They started toward the library and the phone buzzed one more time with a new message that froze her mid-step. "If you show that video today, the people who erased the lab footage will move faster than you can. Run. Meet me at the clock tower in 15 minutes, and I will give you the missing page from the contract. It has the clause that proves your father kept his rights. Come alone." The clock struck the quarter hour with a hollow ring that rolled across the quad. Rain clung to the stone, and to her lashes her choice stood like a forked road under. The bell followed the dean to the safety of walls, or stepped toward the tower where a stranger held a promise, sharp as a blade and bright as a star. Rain threaded the air like silver wire, and the clock rang a low warning as she stood at the base of the tower and weighed the two roads before her: safety behind office doors and signatures, or the risky path to a stranger with a promise. Sharp enough to cut through lies, she typed a short message to Maya and to the dean with a single star and the words 15 minutes in truth, then slid the phone into her pocket and climbed the stone steps that spiraled into shadow. The tower's inner chamber smelled of old wood, bell metal, and the dust of secrets. Wind moved through narrow slits and turned the rain into threads that flashed and vanished. A figure stood by the railing with a hood up and a small leather folder clutched to the chest. "Do not come closer," the voice said, and the voice was a woman's, weary and tired. "I have what you asked for, but you cannot say you got it from Mesh." Stopped 2 strides away and lifted her hands open and empty. "Who are youth?" Woman pulled back the hood and revealed a face she knew from a dozen mornings behind the front desk of the department. Leela, the admin, with patient eyes and a way of finding forms no one else could track. Her hands shook as she held out the folder. "I am sorry for last night," she said. "Hale told me to clone the badge and wipe the drives. He said it was a reset. If I refused, he would end my contract and pin the breach on me. I kept 1 copy because I could not sleep with the weight of it." She opened the folder and saw a single page. Stamped amendment with the same project name written at the top and the same box for inventors. Near the margin, a clause ran down the center like a vein. "Payment and consideration are not delivered within 90 days. Rights revert to the original inventor." Atia, amount listed as a fraction of what any fair deal would grant. And the line marked received was empty at the bottom. Her father's name appeared again beside space for a second signature that had never been filled. While that, a notarized stamp named a foundation as a witness, and the name on the line bled through the page like a Bruiseville finance chair tied to Victor by a middle name, and a charity that poured money into the lab like clean water over a stained lilac. Whisper slid between the bells. They never paid him the balance. They promised equity later and put it on paper that never left a drawer. Lang said donors needed certainty, and he would tidy the origin once the engine won awards. Hale wanted it tidy now, so he started calling it a new method with new math and a new core. The old marks did not fit the story. Why help me? Because I kept my job by closing doors on people who did not have keys, and I do not want to be that person when I sleep. Also, because they told me to have you expelled by the end of the week, and I cannot be the hand that pulls that level. Footsteps clicked on stone below and rose like a tide up the stairwell. Leela's eyes flooded with fear. "You have to go," she said. "Take it and go." She snapped images with her phone as quickly as breath, then slid the paper into her jacket. The steps came faster. Many boots, not campus patrol rhythm, but hired stride. Leela pointed to a narrow service ladder tucked behind a timber brace down to the passage that runs to the old chapel. She said, "I will slow them by telling the truth and getting yelled at for it." They moved at once. She dropped to the ladder and descended into a shaft that smelled of wet rope and iron. Above her, Leela walked to the stair mouth and raised her voice. "If you want to arrest someone, arrest me for keeping copies and for caring about a student." A man answered with a clipped tone that wore legal words like armor. The rest of his sentence blurred under the clang of the bell as it swung for the half hour. She reached a hatch and pushed. It opened into a stone corridor that sloped toward a door with a rusted bar. Rain roared on the other side like applause. She slid the bar and spilled into the courtyard behind the chapel, where the grass shone slick as glass. A black umbrella moved along the path, and the young security officer stepped from under it with a breath of relief. "You are alive," he said. "The dean sent me to find you." Her office just received an injunction warning from the foundation and a letter accusing you of theft and academic sabotage. I told her to hold the line. "What do you have?" She pulled the phone from her jacket and showed him the photos and the clause and the signature that did not exist on any press release. He stared, and his jaw set into a shape that said enough. "Come with me to the student newsroom," he said. "They can archive copies off campus and timestamp them with their feeds. If anything happens, we still have a record beyond our walls. They cut through the rain and reached the basement door painted red, where a cluster of students sat with headphones and coffee. Screens flickered with layouts and headlines and live streams. A girl with ink on her fingers looked up and took in the soaked jacket, the wild eyes, the phone full of fire-truth emergency, she said, and pushed a chair toward them. We loved those days. Dumped files to 3 drives in a cloud the newsroom had borrowed from a server across town. They printed the clause and the patent list in the frame of the video where Lang stood by the test rig with a smile that never reached his eyes. The young officer called the dean and said 5 words that rang like a promise. We have anchors against erasure. Chime rolled. Over the basement, a campus alert flashed across screens. Engineering symposium moved to noon. Donor demonstration of a breakthrough engine. Hay and Lang to present together. All students invited. The newsroom went quiet, then erupted with talk alive. Stage and audience, a microphone. The girl felt the air pressure change. They were accelerating the reveal to erase the truth and cement a name in public memory. Before evidence could breathe, Maya burst into the room with a folder under her coat and rain in her hair. The board minutes, the finance log, the list of foundation disbursements, she said, breathless. The same day, the amendment was signed. A transfer moved from a shell company into the lab. Budget, it is not payment to your father. It is a gift that erased the debt with a flourish. A gift is not consideration. The clause still stands them. Young officer looked between them and then at the newsroom team. We take this to the dean, and then we walk into that symposium. If the power cuts, we have phones and a room full of reporters. If the microphones fail, a bell tower will do the speaking. The editor nodded with a grin that meant trouble for liars. We will stream from 3 angles and mirror 2 student accounts. If someone tries to pull the plug, we switch to battery. Tell the dean we will not blink. They started for the door and almost collided with Nate, who stumbled in pale as chalk with a bruise on his cheek. They took me into a side office, he said, breath ragged. A man said he would fix my future if I kept quiet and make it vanish if I did not. He called the project Hailcore and told me to sign a statement about student misconduct. I ran. He saw the page on the table and the star in the margin, and something cleared. In his face, I would testify, he said. I do not care if I never get a letter of recommendation again. The dean met them in the hallway with 2 faculty allies and a look that could part water. We hold the stage, she said. We do not heckle, we do not break. Anything but silence. If they try to remove you, I will stand in front. If they threaten the newsroom, I will stand in front of that too. They moved as a small river through crowds that gathered in the atrium outside the auditorium, where banners hung with words about innovation and partnership. The SUV waited at the curb again, and men with badges that looked official, because official looks are easy. 2 by watched the doors with empty eyes inside the hall. The engine sat under a canvas on a rolling frame like a sleeping animal. Lights bathed the stage in confident blue, and the big screen behind the lectern glowed with the name of the event. Progress and Power Hail walked out to applause that sounded practiced. Lang followed in a tailored suit with the careful smile of a man who had never touched a broken gear with his hands. He spread his arms and spoke in a voice polished for donors. Today, we show you a breakthrough. Our team has refined over years of research a method that will change how we think about clean power and bring pride to this institution and hope to communities everywhere. Girl felt heat rise in her cheeks and saw in the corner of her eye the dean nod once, as if to say, walk. So she walked up the side aisle, past rows of eyes that widened and mouths that whispered and phones that already lifted to record. She stepped onto the stage and stood within the blue light with her head high and her heart Lang paused mid-sentence and Hale's face tightened into a warning shape. Security started toward the stairs and stopped when the dean took her place at the front row with both hands raised and a look that said, not one step more. The Girl did not touch the microphone. She simply spoke, and the room hushed, because sometimes quiet beats volume when it carries the weight of a story that refuses to bend. You called this a breakthrough, born here, she said. You called it new. You forgot the factory floor and the hands that timed gear by listening to its hum and marked a tooth with a little star. The big screen behind her flickered as the students in the newsroom pushed the stream to test video, filled the space with the sound of her father's engine coming alive. Lang's smile froze on the projection while the real Lang on stage took a step back like the past had just walked through him. Hey, reach for the lectern as if it were a life ring drifting out of reach. Them. Young officer cued the next image, and the amendment appeared. Giant against the blue wash photographs of the clause, the blank receipt line, the witness names, the foundation stamp. Maya read the lines like a bell toll, marking each phrase with the clarity of water. If payment is not delivered within 90 days, rights revert to the original inventory. Murmur rolled across the hall and swelled into something that sounded like a wave breaking on a wall of glass. Lang lifted a hand as though to smooth the air. He began to say the word misunderstanding, and then his phone buzzed, and he paled a shade that did not belong to confidence. Hell leaned into the microphone with a voice tight as wire. This is an ambush staged by a student who violated lab policy and put people at risk. She trespassed, she stole documents, she endangered the integrity of our work. Dean stood at last, and the hall quieted again. Because people know when a voice is carrying the weight of an institution and a conscience together. The integrity in question, she said, belongs to the origin of this engine and the treatment of the people who built it. The only danger here is to those who benefit from silence. We will investigate publicly and immediately. Until then, this demonstration is pause. One of the men from the SUV pushed down the aisle with a badge forward and a narrow stare, and the editor from the newsroom stepped into his path with a camera held steady and a voice that carried a challenge. Say your name and your authority for the record. He hesitated, just long enough to reveal that the badge meant less than his suit had hoped. Lang looked at the side door as if calculating distance. The girl saw it and stepped between him and any clean exit with her head tilted just enough to make the choice visible. You could tell the truth now, she said. You could say his name and mine and the name of the mark you scraped off the teeth of a gear because it did not belong to your tidy story. Hey opened his mouth and closed it and opened it again. He chose neither truth nor flight. He chose a middle path that felt like oil on wet stone. If mistakes were made, we will correct them, he said. Our focus is the future and the benefit to society. The room reacted with a sound that was not applause. It was the sound of people deciding to whom they will listen next. Side door opened, and Lila entered with a hand pressed to her ribs and a bruise blooming at her jaw, and a copy of the amendment clutched tight. She walked straight to the stage and set the page on the lectern and turned to the audience with a voice that wavered but did not break. I made copies because I could not watch this place bury its soul. I was told to erase the record. I am choosing to restore its security. Move toward her, and the dean stepped into their path again. No one touches her. The dean said, you touch her, and you answer to me, and to every student watching this. Live. The girl felt the room tip toward a choice. The engine under canvas seemed to breathe. Rain hammered the roof like a drumline. Her phone buzzed hard with a number she did not know, and a message flashed across the screen with a line that cut through the moment like lightning across a dark field. You think Lang is the end? Check the second page of the N. Foundation ledger. The signature there is a reason this was allowed. It is someone above hell. Hey, it is someone who stands on this stage behind the curtain right now, waiting to decide which side to choose. She turned toward the wing where shadow pooled behind velvet and felt the presence of someone who had not yet moved into the light. A rustle of fabric, a breath held too long, a choice about to land like a hammer on steel. The curtain shifted like a held breath, and a figure stepped into the light. With a calm that felt practiced and heavy with choice, it was the university president, a presence made of polished speeches and handshakes, captured in glossy magazines and donor dinners that smelled of perfume and clean money. She approached the lectern with a measured pace and eyes that weighed consequence before compassion. "We will take a brief pause," she said, and her voice spread through the hall like lacquer over rough wood. Then she faced the girl and the dean and the wall of cameras, and the 3 stories of students pressed into the aisles, and she did not blink. The newsroom stream rolled. The next image, in the second page of the foundation ledger, filled the screen like a flare in fog. There was the clause, marked in neat accountant script, listing the gift that would sanitize the balance and the contingency line that demanded a name change to Hellcore, and a communications plan that minimized origin ambiguity at the bottom, an approval crest, and a long, clear signature, E. Carroll. The room inhaled and did not exhale. The president did not look away. She spoke slowly, as if each word sat on a thin bridge above a river. "This institution accepts many gifts and many conditions," she said. They cut through the rain and reached a basement door painted red, where a cluster of students sat with headphones and coffee. Screens flickered with layouts and headlines and live streams. A girl with ink on her fingers looked up and took in the soaked jacket, the wild eyes, the phone full of fire truth emergency, she said, and pushed a chair toward them. "We loved those days." Dumped files, the 3 drives, and a cloud the newsroom had borrowed from a server across town. They printed the clause and the patent list in the frame of the video, where Lang stood by the test rig with a smile that never reached his eyes. The young officer called the dean and said 5 words that rang like a promise. "We have anchors against erasure." Chime rolled over the basement. A campus alert flashed across screens. Engineering symposium moved to noon. Donor demonstration of a breakthrough engine. Hale and Lang to present together. All students invited. The newsroom went quiet, then erupted with talk alive. Stage and audience, a microphone. The girl felt the air pressure change. They were accelerating the reveal to erase the truth and cement a name in public memory. Before evidence could breathe, Maya burst into the room with a folder under her coat and rain in her hair. "The board minutes, the finance log, the list of foundation disbursements," she said, breathless. The same day the amendment was signed, a transfer moved from a shell company into the lab. "Budget, it is not payment to your father. It is a gift that erased the debt with a flourish. A gift is not consideration. The clause still stands." The young officer looked between them and then at the newsroom team. "We take this to the dean, and then we walk into that symposium if the power cuts. We have phones and a room full of reporters. If the microphones fail, a bell tower will do the speaking." The editor nodded with a grin that meant trouble for liars. "We will stream from 3 angles and mirror to student accounts. If someone tries to pull the plug, we switch the battery. Tell the dean we will not blink." They started for the door and almost collided with Nate, who stumbled in pale as chalk with a bruise on his cheek. "They took me into a side office," he said, breath ragged. A man said he would fix my future if I kept quiet and make it vanish if I did not. "Hey," called the project Hellcore and told me to sign a statement about student misconduct. Randy saw the page on the table and the star in the margin, and something cleared in his face. "I will testify," he said. "I do not care if I never get a letter of recommendation again." The dean met them in the hallway with 2 faculty allies and a look that could part water. "We hold the stage," she said. "We do not heckle. We do not break anything but silence. If they try to remove you, I will stand in front. If they threaten the newsroom, I will stand in front of that tooth." Moved as a small river through crowds that gathered in the atrium outside the auditorium where banners hung with words about innovation and partnership. The SUV waited at the curb again, and men with badges that looked official, because official looks are easy. Tubai watched the doors with empty eyes. Inside the hall, the engine sat under a canvas on a Rolling frame like a sleeping animal, lights bathed the stage in confident blue, and the big screen behind the lectern glowed with the name of the event. Progress and Power Hale walked out to applause that sounded practiced. Lang followed in a tailored suit with the careful smile of a man who had never touched a broken gear with his hands. He spread his arms and spoke in a voice polished for donors. Today, we show you a breakthrough. Our team has refined over years of research a method that will change how we think about clean power and bring pride to this institution and hope to communities everywhere. Girl felt heat rise in her cheeks and saw in the corner of her eye the dean nod once as if to say walk, so she walked up the side aisle, past rows of eyes that widened and mouths that whispered and phones that already lifted to record. She stepped onto the stage and stood within the blue light with her head high and her heart loud. Lang paused mid-sentence and Hale's face tightened into a warning shape. Security started toward the stairs and stopped when the dean took her place at the front row with both hands raised and a look that said, not one step more. The Carol did not touch the microphone. She simply spoke, and the room hushed, because sometimes quiet beats volume when it carries the weight of a story that refuses to bend. You called this a breakthrough born here, she said. You called it new. You forgot the factory floor and the hands that timed the gear by listening to its hum and marked a tooth with a little star. The big screen behind her flickered as the students in the newsroom pushed to stream the test video, filled the space with the sound of her father's engine coming alive. Lang's smile froze on the projection while the real Lang on stage took a step back like the past had just walked through him. Hey, reached for the lectern as if it were a life ring drifting out of reach. Day. Young officer cued the next image and the amendment appeared, giant against the blue wash photographs of the clause, the blank receipt line, the witness names, the foundation stamp. Maya read the lines like a bell toll, marking each phrase with the clarity of water. If payment is not delivered within 90 days, rights revert to the original inventor. A murmur rolled across the hall and swelled into something that sounded like a wave breaking on a wall of glass. Lang lifted a hand as though to smooth the air. He began to say the word misunderstanding, and then his phone buzzed and he paled a shade that did not belong to confidence. Hale leaned into the microphone with a voice tight as wire. This is an ambush staged by a student who violated lab policy and put people at risk. She trespassed, she stole documents, she endangered the integrity of our work. The dean stood at last, and the hall quieted again. Because people know when a voice is carrying the weight of an institution and a conscience together. The integrity in question, she said, belongs to the origin of this engine and the treatment of the people who built it. The only danger here is to those who benefit from silence. We will investigate publicly and immediately. Until then, this demonstration is paused. One of the men from the SUV pushed down the aisle with a badge forward and a narrow stare, and the editor from the newsroom stepped into his path with a camera held steady and a voice that carried a challenge. Say your name and your authority for the record. He hesitated, just long enough to reveal that the badge meant less than his suit had hoped. Lang looked at the side door as if calculating distance. The girl saw it and stepped between him and any clean exit with her head tilted just enough to make the choice visible. You could tell the truth now, she said. You could say his name and mine in the name of the mark you scraped off the teeth of a gear because it did not belong to your tidy story. Hey opened his mouth and closed it and opened it again. He chose neither truth nor flight. He chose a middle path that felt like oil on wet stone. If mistakes were made, we will correct them, he said. Our focus is the future and the benefit to society. The room reacted with a sound that was not applause. It was the sound of people deciding to whom they will listen next. Side door opened, and Lila entered with a hand pressed to her ribs and a bruise blooming at her jaw, and a copy of the amendment clutched tight. She walked straight to the stage and set the page on the lectern and turned to the audience with a voice that wavered but did not break. I made copies because I could not watch this place bury its soul. I was told to erase the record. I am choosing to restore its security. Move toward her, and the dean stepped into their path again. No one touches her, the dean said. You touch her, and you answer to me and to every student watching this live. The girl felt the room tip toward a choice. The engine under canvas seemed to breathe rain, hammered the roof like a drumline. Her phone buzzed hard with a number she did not know, and a message flashed across the screen with a line that cut through the moment like lightning across a dark field. Do you think Lang is the end? Check the second page of the Foundation ledger. The signature there is the reason this was allowed. It is someone above Hale. It is someone who stands on this stage behind the curtain right now, waiting to decide which side to choose. She turned toward the wing where shadow pooled behind velvet and felt the presence of someone who had not yet moved into the light. A rustle of fabric, a breath held too long. A choice about to land like a hammer on stills. The curtain shifted like a held breath, and a figure stepped into the light. With a calm that felt practiced and heavy with choice, it was the university president, a presence made of polished speeches and handshakes, captured in glossy magazines and donor dinners that smelled of perfume and clean money. She approached the lectern with a measured pace and eyes that weighed consequence before compassion. We will take a brief pause, she said, and her voice spread through the hall like lacquer over rough wood. Then she faced the girl and the dean and the wall of cameras, and the 3 stories of students pressed into the aisles, and she did not blink. The newsroom stream rolled the next image, and the second page of the Foundation ledger filled the screen like a flare in fog. There was the clause, marked in neat accountant script, listing the gift that would sanitize the balance, and the contingency line that demanded a name change to Hellcore, and a communications plan that minimized origin ambiguity. At the bottom, an approval crest and a long, clear signature, E. Carroll. The room inhaled and did not exhale. The president did not look away. She spoke slowly, as if each word sat on a thin bridge above a river. This institution accepts many gifts and many conditions, she said. We rely on trust and on the guardianship of our leaders. If that trust is broken, we will repair it. If those guardians failed, we will name it Hale. Shifted and gripped the lectern with both hands, as if the wood could argue for him. Lang angled his body toward the wing, where the exit waited, like a quiet promise of safety. The dean stood still as a stone at flood stage, and the girl felt the floor hum with a gathering that had nothing to do with power lines or the engine under canvas. A cluster of suited men near the back got on their phones at once, and the big screen flickered, but held because the newsroom had mirrored the feed to a dozen student accounts that would not go dark. At the same time, the young security officer lifted his wrist radio and said one simple line that the first row could hear and the rest could read on his face. No blackout today. The president turned to Hale. Did you witness the assignment of rights from Marcus Bell to the holding company, knowing payment had not been delivered? Her question landed without a tremor. Hale opened his mouth with a shape that looked like denial, and then changed tack because denial was a bridge already on fire. I witnessed an agreement in progress, he said. I believed it would be honored. This is a smear led by a student with a history of insubordination and by staff who misunderstand the stakes of innovation. The girl stepped closer to the canvas and pulled it back with hands that did not shake. The engine lay in the wash of blue light, a body made of ribs and veins and bright breath that waited to be called. She set her palm on the housing where a faint scratch had been buffed and almost erased. Here's the tooth where the mark was scrubbed, she said. Here is the whisper it leaves when timing fights itself. Listen. She adjusted the valve. She traced the wire path that Lang had once admired in a factory bay, far from banners and polished floors. She set her ear near the frame and nodded as a soft pulse wavered like a singer just off key. Then she moved the gear one notch and the pulse settled into a clean line that felt like a truth finding its name. She switched the ignition and the engine woke with a note so steady it felt like a vow kept it. Last the students in the upper rows cheered, and the sound crashed into the quiet with a force that made the banners shiver. Lang lifted a hand as if to calm a horse, and his polished smile returned with effort and sweat at the edges. Let us not disrupt a public moment of progress, he said. We can resolve questions of paperwork and memory later. What matters is the gift this will bring to the world. K. Dean answered him without raising her voice. Gifts that arrive through theft are not gifts. They are debts. With Bowser Tech near the wing, began to reach for the power cable with a nervous glance at someone in a suit, and the young officer moved faster and stood between the cable and the wall with a look that had learned the geometry of courage. Overnight, the feed held the engine sang the room, decided it would not be trained to forget. The girl felt her phone buzz against her ribs like a second heart. Hold the stage for 3 minutes, said the unknown number. Proof is on the way. She closed her fist around the phone and stared at the aisles and the doors and the faces that had come to witness the christening of a lie, and were now watching a naming held in the open air. The president studied the ledger page again, then lifted her gaze to the audience. If my signature allowed a condition that erased the maker, she said, then my signature will also open the process that restores that name. She turned to Lang, and her voice sharpened the way cold sharpens water into glass. Mr. Lang, were you present at the test where the prototype first ran under the hands of Marcus Blanc? Kept the well-bred calm of a man trained never to concede the ground beneath his shoes. I attend many tests, he said. Innovation is a river with many tributaries. Memory is not a court. The newsroom editor spoke from the front with a camera in her hands and ink on her fingers. Memory is not a court, she said. But we have a video that is. Her partner pushed the frame again, and the factory scene returned with the clean hum and the star tooth and the smile that never reached the eyes. Gasps rippled through the hall as if it were a stadium and a goal had landed in a net. No one could move. Hale lunged toward the laptop, and the dean stepped right, and he stalled because there was no way to push past without announcing the shape of desperation in front of thousands of eyes. He tried words instead. This is old, informal, undocumented. He said it proves nothing about ownership or safety. What solves problems is stewardship, not sentiment. The girl found the eyes of the president, and then the eyes of the upper rows where the students had pressed closer and closer to the rail. Stewardship means rising when the truth is heavy and carrying it anyway, she said. Sentiment is the name people give a story when they fear it will break their plans. Doors at the back opened, and 2 figures moved through the aisle with steady steps that cut a path without force or noise. Uncle Ray walked ahead with shoulders set and jaw firm. Beside him moved a man with a limp and a coat that had seen too much rain, and a face she knew the way you know your own hands in the dark. A hush fell so complete that even the engine seemed to quiet itself in respect. Re-guided the man to the foot of the stage, and the girl felt her knees soften and then harden and then hold. He looked thinner than the photograph in her old K box, and his hair carried more winter, and his eyes held both exhaustion and a light that had never gone out. Even when money ran dry and doors closed, he lifted his hand, and for a second, she was 5 again, and Greece was a badge, and a kitchen table was a lab, and the world could be fixed. If you listened to it carefully enough. Marcus Bell stepped onto the stage and paused with one hand on the rail and the other on Ray's arm. He did not hurry. Turns truth into panic. He reached the lectern and laid his fingers on the wood and breathed in once and out once, and the entire room seemed to inhale and exhale with him. That is my mark, he said, and his voice was not loud, but it traveled clean and straight to the highest seat. That sound is my work in my daughter's ear. I signed a paper that I did not understand because a man told me a promise and a job and a future were on the other side, and the factory was closing, and I was tired and proud and scared. They did not pay me what they said. They said they would fix it later. They told me the world would forget the name of the mark because progress does not wear fingerprints. Lang took a half step forward with the pivot of someone preparing to direct responsibility into a corridor with no exits. "We never hid your name," he began, and the president lifted a hand, and the sound of his sentence died like a spark, and Rain Marcus turned to hell. "You stood in my bay with a visitor badge and wrote notes while my engine sang. You saw the star, and you took it, and you taught students to call it new." He turned back to the crowd, and his face softened in grief rather than rage. "I was ashamed for a long time, and thought maybe they were right to take the story out of my hands because I did not have the right suit or the money to protect it. Then I saw my daughter fix in 10 minutes what a room full of people could not fix in a year. That is not a miracle, that is inheritance." Hall erupted with a roar that shook dust from the lights and broke the careful posture of men in the back. Roll phones lifted like a field of stars. The newsroom stream surged past 10,000 eyes, and then 20, and then more, because the link was being pushed into group chats and forums and news feeds as fast as fingers could copy. The young security officer stood to one side, watching the aisles, and whispered into his radio with a small smile, "The story is out of the building now." The president looked at the ledger on the screen, excuse, and then at the paper in the dean's hands, and then at Marcus and the girl, and there was a long human pause where her shoulders lowered and the public mass cracked just a little. "Effective immediately," she said, "the engine demonstration is halted. The partnership with the foundation is suspended, and a special review board will convene with external counsel and student representatives. Marcus Bell will be recorded as inventor of origin, and his family will be offered counsel at the university's expense. Professor Hale, you are relieved of lab duties pending findings. Mr. Lang, you will provide all records, including communications with the finance chair and the holding company, or you will leave this campus under." Squirt Long laughed the quick, brittle laugh of a man who believes he can still buy the weather. "You cannot ask for what does not exist," he said. "You want emails that were never written, budgets that were never drafted, agreements that were never signed. Your story will die in a week, and the engine will carry the name of whoever has the most ink and the biggest stage." Editor from the newsroom raised her camera and said 6 words that dropped like a match into dry straw. "Then we will be your stage now." A hiss rippled near the wing, and a cable sparked, and the engine coughed with a sharp kick because someone had tried to pull a line while the room looked away. The girl spun and hit the kill in one motion, and her palm stung, and the motor settled into silence before the spark became flame. She stared into the wing where a hand had vanished, and then looked back at the crowd. "Machines are honest," she said. "They tell you when harm is coming. If you listen, people choose." President nodded once at the officer who moved off to the side door with 2 colleagues. Hale stared at the floor as if there were a line there he could rewind and step over again with a different foot. Lila stood with a hand on her bruise and a look that held pain and relief in equal measure. Maya stood with the board minutes like a sword she had never meant to carry but would now defend. Ray stood with the ease of a man who had finally set down a load he had carried in secret for too long. The unknown number buzzed again in the girl's pocket, and she glanced down one line. "Ledger box in the foundation office has a hidden drawer under the felt. Pull the brass tab and you will find the original payment envelope still sealed." She lifted her eyes to the president and the dean and the room and felt how close they were to closing the loop that had strangled her father's name for years. She spoke to the president because power must be asked to move in front of witnesses. If it is to move at all, there is a drawer under the felt. "In the ledger box," she said. "Bring it here now with campus police and open it on Camorta." President held her gaze and then nodded to the officer who radioed a team, and then to the editor who smiled like a storm given a microphone. "We will open It on live feed, the editor said, with 3 angles, and a clock line shifted again, and for the first time, his practiced calm cracked wide enough to show the animal under the suit. He looked toward the exit, and then toward the cameras, and then toward the girl and Marcus and the president, and he saw what everyone else saw. The lines had moved, and they were not moving back. Dean turned to Marcus. "Will you stay for the opening of that drawer?" He nodded once and took his daughter's hand, and the two of them stood at the edge of the stage together, as if they were at the lip of a bridge that finally extended across water instead of dropping into its outside. The rain softened, and the blue light on the stage warmed as the text shifted. A gel in the engine sat like a living witness, waiting to speak again when called. Students murmured and moved and held their places because they knew the next minute might deliver something that would become a story they told for years. Whenever anyone asked them if truth can still win in a room built for applause, the office's radio crackled with a burst of voices and a phrase that pulled every gaze toward the side door. Found the brass tab opening. Now the president looked at the girl, and then at the dean, and then at the cameras, and lifted a hand toward the door where a small procession had begun to form. The hall leaned forward like one body. The future stood in the threshold with the past tucked under its arm in the shape of a thin envelope that had never been opened, into history that had never been allowed to breathe it. Envelope cleared the door, and the officer held it up for all to see, and the room filled with a collective pulse that sounded like a heartbeat, amplified through wood and wire and glass. What waited inside would either be another trap or the final proof that the star had always been enough, and that the world had only needed to listen. The officer stepped forward, holding the envelope high, so the crowd could see the faded paper sealed with wax that had cracked but never been broken. The cameras zoomed in the newsroom stream, mirrored the close-up, and the murmurs rose and fell like the sea against a stone cliff. The president stood, with her hand lifted and her face stripped of its polished calm, replaced by a kind of human gravity that made silence obey. "Open it," she said. K officer slit the seal carefully and drew out a stack of notes and a thin slip of paper folded twice. With the edge worn soft by years of waiting, the notes were cash-faded bills bound by a band marked payment for Bell. The slip of paper was a receipt, unsigned and undated, and the line that should have carried a signature from Marcus Bell was empty. The officer spread both items on the lectern under the light, and the cameras caught the ink, the absence, and the promise left hanging in the air. The girl felt her father's hand tighten around hers, and when she looked at him, his eyes glistened, but held steady. "That is what they brought to my table," he said, "money without the respect of a signed record. They told me to take it, or the factory would close on my watch. They told me the paper was formality, and the future would fill it later. I did not sign because I knew it was a trick, and I thought maybe I could still fight. But then the factory closed, and the paper disappeared, and the world called me careless." The president turned to the crowd, and her voice did not rise early, but it carried, with the strength of weight, finally acknowledged. "This is proof that the contract was never fulfilled. The rights remained with the inventor and his family, by law and by honor." What followed was a fabrication to serve those who profited from silence langs. Mask broke at last, his smile gone, his face tightened into lines of fury and fear. "You think the world cares about scraps of paper?" he snapped. "Do you think investors will line up for a name that never left a factory floor? They will follow us because we already own the stage, and you are too late." The girl stepped forward to the lectern, set the envelope beside the clause, beside the video, still beside the blueprint with the star. "Kay," she lifted her chin and spoke into the hall, into the cameras, into the phones, and into the stream that had already climbed past 100,000 eye stages. "Belong to whoever stands on them," she said. "You built yours on theft. We built ours on work, on sound, on a heartbeat that never lied. You are not the future, we are. The roar that followed was not just from the hall. It came from notifications buzzing from every pocket news outlets, already echoing the feed posts, multiplying faster than any lawyer could draft a denial. The president nodded once, and the dean placed a hand on the girl's shoulder with a quiet pride that steadied the storm. Security moved toward Lang and Hale, not with aggression, but with the firm inevitability of process. Lang tried one last pivot. If you remove me, you remove the funding, he said. Your labs will starve, your projects will wither, and your students will lose everything. The president faced him squarely. Then let them lose false wealth to gain their own names. Let them learn that an institution without integrity is rubble, no matter how high it builds its walls. Hale sagged against the stage rail, his eyes his mouth unable to shape the defense he had repeated in his head for years. He looked at the girl once with something almost like a plea, but it passed without answer. He was escorted out beside Lang, and the room let them go without applause, without jeers, only the kind of silence reserved for endings. Marcus stepped to the microphone once more. I was silent too long, he said. I thought losing my work was the same as losing myself, but today my daughter showed me that silence was the real theft. I give my name back to this engine, not as a shield, but as a promise. The promise that truth does not vanish when money tells it to. He turned to her, and his voice softened, though the microphone still carried it. Carried what I dropped you, fixed what I could not. The mark was never just mine, it was always ours. She hugged him there on the stage, grease and rain still on her jacket, tears finally breaking free down her face. And when the crowd stood to its feet, the sound was not just applause, it was vindication. A storm of hands and voices claiming the truth as their own. The newsroom cut the stream with one last frame, the star scratched on a gear tooth, glowing under light, and the words, original inventor, Marcus Bell. Social feeds flooded with the image, and with it, a wave of stories from other students, from other families who had lost credit to the clean hands of others. The story had leaped the walls, and no amount of power could drag it back into silence. Evening, as the rain cleared and the campus glistened under streetlights, the dean gathered them in her office with coffee that tastes like relief and exhaustion. She told them the board had voted unanimously to convene an independent inquiry with state oversight. She told them the foundation had suspended Lang and that civil suits were already forming. She told them that the school would endow a new lab in Marcus Bell's name dedicated to open invention and student access. But most of all, she told the girls something that rang deeper than all the announcements. You reminded us why we teach, she said. It's not to polish the powerful, but to raise those who will not bow the tour. She and her father walked past the darkened auditorium where the engine still sat under its canvas. She pulled the cover back, just enough to see the metal gleam, and laid her hand once more on the housing machines. Are honest, she whispered. They speak if you listen, and people can be. To her father smiled, tired but whole, and they walked out together under a sky cleared of storm, where stars pricked the night like the tiny marks that had guided her hands and her heart. All along the story was complete, the lesson etched into more than paper, that integrity cannot be erased by silence, that power cannot erase inheritance, and that sometimes the impossible is not fixing an engine, but proving to the world that it was never broken at all. The end.